My dear child, I was quiet because I was building something loud for you. And the workshop doors that have been sealed shut during every day of the silence you interpreted as absence are opening right now. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal will permanently rewrite the story your pain has been telling about why heaven went quiet on you. The silence was not empty. It was not passive. It was not the sound of a God who stopped speaking because he stopped caring. It was the sound of a sealed workshop, a construction environment so deliberately closed off from external noise that the person standing outside the doors could not hear a single sound of what was being built on the other side. Something was being built the entire time, and today you see it. A master craftsman does not build in public. The precision required for the kind of work that changes the recipient's life permanently demands a silence that casual communication destroy. Every conversation through the workshop door introduces vibration. Every progress report redirects attention from the work to the reporting. Every reassurance spoken through the walls costs the craftsman minutes that the piece being built cannot afford to lose. My beloved child, I sealed the workshop because what I was building for you required the total silence that your pain has been prosecuting as abandonment. The prosecution was convincing. The evidence, unanswered prayers, unfelt presence, the suffocating quiet of a heaven that seemed to have moved its attention to other addresses, was overwhelming, and you had no defense against it until now, because the doors are opening, and what is being carried out of the workshop into the light is about to serve as the only defense the silence ever needed. Stay here. What I reveal next is what was being built, and why the scale of it required every single day of quiet your faith endured. Type doors opening if you have been living in a divine silence so long it felt like abandonment. And God just told you the silence was not absence but a sealed workshop where something was being built that required complete quiet to construct correctly. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The workshop was sealed the day the silence began, and every day between that sealing and this opening was a day where the craftsman's hands never stopped moving, even though the person outside the doors could not hear a single sound of the construction. My beloved child, I need you to understand the architecture of the silence. The workshop was not sealed randomly. It was sealed on a specific day, the day you would identify as the beginning of the quiet season. The day the prayers that used to produce felt responses began producing nothing but the echo of your own voice, bouncing back from a ceiling that felt solid rather than open. That day was not the day I stopped listening. It was the day I sealed the workshop because the project I was beginning required an acoustic isolation so complete that not even the vibration of my voice traveling through the walls to your ears could be permitted. The acoustic isolation was for the work, not against you. My dear one, I need you to understand what is built inside sealed workshop versus what is built in an open one. An open workshop produces accessible work. Pieces built with regular interruption, with progress visible to the observer, with quality calibrated to the expectation level of someone who is watching each stage and evaluating in real time. The work is competent. It is not transcendent. A sealed workshop produces transcendent work. Because the craftsman is not managing the observer's expectations alongside the building. His full attention is on the piece. His complete focus is on the joints, the measurements, the precision of connections that will determine whether what emerges from the doors is merely functional, or whether it carries the unmistakable quality of something that was built by hands whose attention was never divided. This message was not released for everyone who has experienced spiritual quiet. This was aimed at the one person whose specific silence corresponds to a specific workshop that was sealed for a specific duration, because the specific piece being built inside it required every day of undivided attention the craftsman could give. Type undivided if you just realized the silence was not God withdrawing his attention from you, but God giving undivided attention to something being built for you. And the undivided focus is why the workshop had to be sealed and the silence had to be complete. I have been inside the sealed workshop for every second of the silence. And the reason no sound escaped to your side of the doors is because my hands were too occupied with the building to pause long, enough to produce the reassurance your heart was begging for, my dear one, not because reassurance was unimportant, because the piece was at a stage where pausing to speak through the doors would have compromised a joint whose precision determines whether the entire structure holds when it is placed into your life. Some joints in the construction required continuous hand pressure, sustained, unbroken, hours-long contact between the craftsman's hands and the material, and removing the hands to walk to the workshop door and whisper, "I am still here," would have released the pressure at the exact moment the joint needed it most. I chose the joint over the whisper, and the choosing cost me too. My beloved child, I watched your pain through the sealed doors, not from the other side of the workshop, unaware of what was happening outside. From directly behind the doors, close enough to hear your breathing, close enough to detect the specific cadence of a person whose prayers were shifting from confident asking to desperate whispering, to the eventual silence of someone who concluded the whispering was pointless, because the room on the other side of the doors was empty. The room was not empty. My hands were full. I chose you for this message because the silence has reached the point where one more day without the sound of the doors opening would have converted the pain of waiting into the theology of abandonment. And a theology of abandonment, once installed, is harder to remove than the silence that produced it. The doors are opening before the theology hardens, because the craftsman who chose the joint over the whisper is not willing to let the silence that was necessary for the building become the silence that permanently damages the one the building was always for. Type hands full if God has been inside the sealed workshop the entire time, close enough to hear your breathing through the doors, and the silence was not empty presence, but full hands that could not pause the construction long enough to produce the reassurance your heart was begging for, without compromising what was being built. I know what the silence has been doing to the specific place inside you where the sound of my voice used to live, my beloved child. There was a time when that place was full, not full of dramatic spiritual experiences or constant supernatural communication, full of the quiet, reliable, consistent awareness that the God you were speaking to was speaking back, a warmth after prayer, a settled knowing after seeking, the specific sensation of a conversation completing rather than dissolving into acoustic emptiness. That place was furnished with the evidence of reciprocal communication, and the furniture has been disappearing piece by piece across the months of silence until the room inside you, where my voice used to register, is empty. The room feels abandoned, and an abandoned room echoes. My child, I watched the emptying happen, not as a single dramatic removal, but as a slow, incremental loss that your awareness processed one missing piece at a time. The first month of silence removed the warmth after prayer. The second month removed the settled knowing. By the third month, the last remaining piece of furniture, the baseline belief that the silence was temporary, was removed by a duration that exceeded the threshold your faith had assigned to the category of normal spiritual quiet. Normal quiet lasts days, maybe weeks. This quiet lasted months, and months of acoustic emptiness in a room that used to carry the resonance of a reciprocal God produces a conclusion that no amount of theological correction can override. He is not there. The room is proof. My beloved child, the empty room was the silence's cruelest effect, because the room was not a metaphor for your faith. It was the actual location inside your spirit where my voice registered, the specific receptor that was calibrated to my frequency. And a receptor that receives nothing for months does not just go quiet. It begins questioning whether it was ever actually receiving anything at all. The doubt traveled backward, questioning not just the present silence but the past sounds. The deepest wound the silence inflicted was not the absence of God's voice. It was watching other people receive what your sealed workshop was withholding, my dear child. You heard them speak about answered prayers with the casual certainty of people whose workshop doors were never sealed. You witnessed their testimonies, real, genuine, undeniable accounts of divine communication arriving in their lives with a regularity that your empty receptor room could not reconcile with the silence your own prayers were producing. And each testimony you heard became a comparison that the silence weaponized against the one question your spirit could not stop asking. Why them and not me? The question was not jealousy. It was diagnostic. You were using their experience as a control group, measuring the silence in your life against the sound in theirs, to determine whether the variable was God's willingness to speak or your worthiness to be spoken to. The control group's data was overwhelming. God speaks, God responds. God communicates with his children through felt presence and answered prayer and the specific warmth that you used to experience before the workshop was sealed. My beloved child, the control group produced a verdict your faith could not appeal. God speaks to others. God is silent with me. Therefore the variable is me. The verdict installed itself as an identity, and the identity has been governing your approach to me ever since, producing a posture of diminished expectation that enters every prayer, already anticipating the echo, already bracing for the emptiness, already calculating the emotional cost of one more unanswered attempt to communicate with a God who apparently responds to everyone, except the person whose receptor room has been empty for months. The verdict was wrong. The variable was never you. The variable was the workshop, sealed for your project, open for theirs. Different projects, different construction timelines, different acoustic requirements. Their sound was not evidence of your silence being personal. It was evidence of their project being different. Type not the variable if you have been measuring God's silence in your life against his communication in others' lives. And the comparison produced a verdict that said the variable was you until God revealed the variable was always the workshop and the different acoustic requirements of different projects being built for different people. The silence was never a verdict on your worthiness. It was the acoustic requirement of the most significant piece the craftsman has ever built for a single person. My beloved one, I need to permanently separate the silence from the identity it created. The silence said, "You are not worth speaking to." The truth says, what was being built for you was too important to risk the acoustic distortion that speaking through the workshop doors would have introduced into the construction environment. The silence was not about your value to the craftsman. It was about the value of what the craftsman was building. My child, different projects require different acoustic conditions. Some pieces can be built in an open workshop with music playing and conversations flowing, and the craftsman periodically walking to the door to update the person outside on progress. Those pieces are beautiful. They serve their purpose. They are built with skill and care, but they are not what I was building for you. What I was building for you belongs to a category that the open workshop cannot produce. A category that requires the craftsman's hands to work at a precision level so fine that the vibration of his own voice traveling through the air of the workshop would introduce a micro-disturbance at the joint level that the piece cannot tolerate. The joints in your piece are measured in spiritual microns, and micron-level precision does not survive acoustic disturbance. My dear one, your silence was longer than theirs because your piece is more precise than theirs, not more valuable in the sense of divine favoritism, more precise in the sense of construction requirement. The joints that connect the components of what is being built for your life demanded a duration of sealed quiet that less precise joints would not have required. Longer silence equals finer joints, and finer joints produce a piece whose structural integrity exceeds what faster-built, acoustically interrupted construction can achieve. The silence was the price of precision, and the precision is what you are about to see when the doors open fully. The workshop doors are beginning to move, and the first sound escaping through the opening crack is not the craftsman's voice, but the sound of the piece itself resonating at a frequency your empty receptor room has never processed. My beloved child, something changed in the last few days, not in your circumstances, in the silence. The quality of the silence shifted, almost imperceptibly, from the dense, sealed, acoustically dead quiet of a workshop in active construction to a slightly different texture, a loosening, as though the acoustic seal on the doors was beginning to decompress in preparation for an opening that the craftsman authorized after completing the final joint. The final joint is complete, and the decompression is what you felt this week. My dear one, I need you to understand what you detected. The sensation you experienced, the one you could not trace to any external cause, and almost dismissed as wishful thinking, was the first sound wave escaping through the micro-gap of doors that are beginning to open after months of being sealed. The sound was not my voice. It was the resonance of the completed piece, the specific acoustic signature that a finished object produces when the craftsman removes his hands from the final joint and the piece begins vibrating at its natural frequency for the first time. The piece is vibrating, and your receptor room, the empty room inside you where my voice used to live, just detected the vibration before your conscious mind could identify its source. I have been preparing this opening behind the sealed doors. The final stages of construction, the finishing, the sanding, the application of the last layer of precision that converts a functional piece into a transcendent one. Those stages were completed this week, while you were carrying the last days of a silence whose end was closer than the emptiness was letting you perceive. The craftsman is finished, the doors are moving, and the first frequency of what was built is already reaching the room inside you that thought it would never receive anything again. Type first frequency if you felt something shift in the quality of the silence this week. A texture change, a loosening, a sensation your receptor room almost dismissed as wishful thinking. And you now believe it was the first sound wave of a completed piece escaping through doors that are beginning to open for the first time. I was quiet because I was building something loud for you. And the title carries that exact contrast, because the relationship between the silence and what it produced is inverse in a way your pain never allowed you to consider. My dear one, the longer the silence, the louder the result. That is the engineering principle behind every sealed workshop project the craftsman has ever completed. A short silence produces a modest piece, functional, adequate, built with enough quiet to achieve baseline quality. A medium silence produces a significant piece, noticeable, impactful, carrying the precision that an extended acoustic isolation provides. But a silence as long as yours, a silence that stretched across months of empty receptor rooms and unanswered prayers, and the slow suffocation of a faith that was running out of air, a silence that long produces something whose volume, when it enters the world, will be unmistakable. The silence was the compression. The opening is the detonation. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to your specific experience. Every day of quiet was a day the craftsman's hands were adding volume to the piece. Not loudness in the acoustic sense, volume in the dimensional sense, the mass, the weight, the significance, the sheer scale of what was being constructed inside an environment whose silence was the precondition for the scale to be achieved. The piece is massive because the silence was long, and the emergence of something massive from a sealed workshop does not happen quietly. Workshop doors opening after extended silence produce a sound that the surrounding environment registers as an event. The people who watched the silence from outside, who observed the sealed doors and drew their own conclusions about whether anything was happening inside. Those people are about to witness the opening, and what they see emerging will retroactively explain every day of quiet in a single moment of revelation. My child, the silence just became the setup for the loudest moment of your life. And the moment is here. The doors are fully opening now, my beloved child, and the light from outside the workshop is hitting the surface of the completed piece for the first time. And the reflection is producing a brilliance that the sealed darkness of the construction environment never allowed you to preview. I need you to feel the proximity of the reveal, not the spiritual concept of something approaching. The physical, present tense, happening right now sensation of workshop doors, swinging wide on hinges that have not moved in months. The sound of the hinges themselves carrying a significance that your receptor room is processing as the first real sound from heaven's direction since the silence began. The hinges are speaking. And the hinges are louder than the silence ever was. My dear one, the piece is being lifted from the workbench, not by assistance, by the craftsman's own hands, the same hands that sealed the doors, that pressed into the joints, that worked in silence for the duration of the construction, without pausing for the reassurance your pain was requesting. Those hands are now carrying the completed piece toward the opening, where the light is streaming in, and where the person who has been standing outside the sealed doors for months is about to see for the first time what the silence was protecting. The craftsman is walking toward you, carrying what he built. In his own hands, everything has been building toward this threshold moment. The silence that wounded, the empty receptor room, the comparison with others whose workshops were open. The verdict that said the variable was you. The theology of abandonment that was forming in the gap between your prayers and the absence of felt response. All of it was the outside experience of a person who could not see through sealed doors into the workshop, where the craftsman never stopped working. The doors are open. The craftsman is approaching. And the piece in his hands is about to explain the silence in a language that does not require words. Type, he is carrying it, if you can feel the workshop doors swinging open right now, the hinges sounding for the first time in months, and the craftsman is walking toward you, carrying in his own hands the piece that every day of silence was required to build. The piece is in front of you. The craftsman's hands are holding it in the light, and what you are seeing is so far beyond what the silence allowed you to imagine was being built. that the first response your spirit produces is not excitement but silence of a completely different kind. My beloved child, this is the moment. The moment the doors are fully open and the darkness of the sealed workshop gives way to the light that reveals what was constructed inside it. The moment the person who was standing outside the doors, interpreting the silence as abandonment, sees with their own eyes what the silence was actually producing. The moment every lie the quiet told about the craftsman's absence is permanently destroyed by the evidence of what only his sustained, focused, acoustically isolated presence could have built. The peace is real, and the peace is loud. I was quiet because I was building something loud for you. The title is not a metaphor. It is the engineering report of a craftsman who sealed his workshop to produce a piece whose volume, whose scale, whose precision, whose quality, whose sheer undeniable significance required every single day of silence the outside experienced. Not one day was wasted. Not one moment of quiet was empty. The hands never stopped. The measurements never paused. The joints were being pressed during the exact hours your receptor room was registering nothing. My child, look at what the silence built. The piece carries the fingerprints of every hour the craftsman spent in acoustic isolation on your behalf. The precision of the joints tells you how still the environment had to be. The scale of the construction tells you how long the building took. And the quality of the finished work tells you something the silence never could. That the craftsman who went quiet did not go quiet because he stopped caring. He went quiet because what he was building for you required the kind of care that speaking through doors would have interrupted. The silence just explained itself, and the explanation is in your hands. Now that the piece is in your hands, everything about the silent season is being permanently rewritten. Not by theology, but by the evidence of what you are holding, my dear child. This is what happens when the workshop doors open, and the person who was prosecuting the silence as abandonment encounters the physical, undeniable. Hold it in your hands evidence of what was being constructed on the other side of the sealed doors. The prosecution collapses, not because the defense made a better argument, because the evidence walked out of the workshop and the prosecution's entire case was built on the absence of evidence that just arrived. The case is dismissed by what you are holding, not by what anyone is saying. My beloved child, the piece the craftsman built is now producing the acoustic opposite of the silence that created it. The piece is loud, not with noise but with presence. The specific, unmistakable, room-filling presence of something whose quality announces itself without requiring explanation. When a master craftsman carries a finished piece into the light, the piece does not need a description. Its presence communicates its value, and the value communicates the duration of the silence that was required to achieve it. The empty receptor room inside you is filling, not with the old furniture that was removed piece by piece during the silence, with new furniture, furnished by the resonance of the completed piece. A resonance so rich and so full that the room that was emptied by months of silence is being furnished to a level the pre-silence room never achieved. The room is fuller now than it was before the silence began, because the piece that is producing the resonance was built at a quality level the pre-silence craftsman had not yet applied to your project. My child, the silence did not just restore what was lost. It upgraded the entire system. And the upgrade is producing a sound your receptor room has never processed before. Type louder than before if you can feel the empty receptor room inside you filling for the first time. Not with the old furniture being returned, but with something new, something richer, something whose resonance exceeds anything the room contained before the silence began. Because the piece that is producing it was built at a quality the pre-silence season never achieved. Let me show you what your life looks like. Now that the peace has been delivered, and the receptor room has been refurnished at a level the pre-silence season never contained, my dear one. The first thing that changes is the hearing. You have been living with a receptor room that was registering nothing, an internal silence that matched the external silence of the sealed workshop, and produced a spiritual deafness so complete that even ambient divine communication was not being processed. The refurnished room operates at a higher sensitivity than the original room, not because the room changed dimensions, because the furniture the peace installed is tuned to frequencies the old furniture could not receive. You are about to hear things you have never heard before, and the hearing will feel like discovering a sense you did not know you possessed. My beloved child, the mornings change permanently. You have been waking into the silence, the first conscious awareness of every day, confirming that the receptor room was still empty, and the workshop was still sealed, and the craftsman's voice was still absent from the acoustic environment of your life. Tomorrow you wake into resonance. The specific sustained, peace-generated resonance of a completed construction that is now occupying the room where the silence used to live, producing a continuous sound that does not require daily prayer to activate, because the peace resonates constantly. The peace was not built to produce intermittent sound. It was built to produce continuous resonance. Your prayer life changes at the foundation. The prayers that were dissolving into acoustic emptiness are going to begin producing immediate felt responses. Not because God suddenly started listening, because the receptor room that was registering nothing is now furnished with equipment that detects divine communication at a sensitivity level the emptied room could not achieve. The prayers were always reaching the workshop. The workshop was always receiving them. The problem was never transmission. It was reception. And the reception system just received a permanent upgrade. People are going to notice the resonance before you describe the piece. Because a person carrying a craftsman-built piece at the quality level yours was constructed produces an atmospheric sound that others detect without being able to identify its source. My beloved child, the ones who watched you during the silent season, who observed the sealed doors, who sensed the acoustic emptiness you were carrying, who perhaps even offered well-intentioned explanations for the quiet that ranged from theological correction to the suggestion that you were simply not praying hard enough. Those people are about to encounter someone whose receptor room is producing a sound it never produced before. Not louder behavior, louder presence. And presence speaks at a frequency explanation cannot reach. My child, there is a specific quality that a person carries when a master craftsman has personally delivered a piece into their internal space. It is not confidence. It is not spiritual performance. It is the acoustic output of a receptor room that was empty and is now furnished with something whose resonance changes the atmosphere around the person carrying it. The resonance radiates. Others feel it the way you feel warmth from a source you cannot see. Unable to identify what changed, but unable to deny that the temperature in the room shifted, they will say something is different about you. They will mean the silence ended, but they will not have the language for what replaced it. Connections that require resonance to form are about to begin appearing. There are relationships, assignments, and divine partnerships that operate on frequencies the empty receptor room could not detect and could not attract. Those connections are tuned to the specific frequency the piece produces. And now that the piece is installed, the frequency is broadcasting for the first time. My dear one, what is attracted by the new frequency is fundamentally different from what was available during the silence, because the frequency itself is new. and new frequencies attract new responses. Type new frequency if you believe that the piece installed in your receptor room is broadcasting a frequency that was not available during the silence. And what is attracted by the new frequency are connections and opportunities that could not form while the room was empty and the workshop was sealed. I need you to understand why I sealed the workshop for you, rather than building in the open the way I build for others. My beloved child, because the sealing reveals something about what I saw in you that warranted the craftsman's highest level of construction. Not every project receives a sealed workshop. Most projects are built in the open. The craftsman, working with regular communication, periodic updates, felt presence maintained throughout the construction process. The person receiving the piece experiences the building as a collaborative journey. They see the progress. They hear the measurements being taken. They feel the craftsman's proximity at every stage. And the piece that is produced is excellent, built with skill and care and the quality that open workshop construction consistently delivers. But open workshop quality is not what your project required. My child, I sealed the workshop because what I saw inside you, the specific combination of calling, capacity, assignment, and spiritual infrastructure that your life was designed to carry, demanded a construction quality that the open workshop cannot achieve. The piece being built for you is not a standard grade construction. It is a master grade construction. The kind that the craftsman produces only when the recipient's internal infrastructure can sustain the weight and the complexity and the precision of something built at the highest level available. Your infrastructure can sustain it, and the sustainability is why the sealed workshop was selected. I chose you for this specific construction grade because the assignment embedded in your existence requires a piece whose joints are measured in microns. The calling you carry demands equipment whose precision exceeds what interrupted construction can produce. And the life I am building for you requires a foundation whose structural integrity can only be achieved in the absolute acoustic stillness of a workshop that the craftsman sealed with his own hands. My dear one, you received the longest silence because you are receiving the finest piece, and the finest piece is reserved for the infrastructure the craftsman trusts most. The doubt surfacing right now is making its final argument from the evidence room of the silence. And the argument is that the piece you are seeing might not be real because the silence lasted too long for anything good to come from it. My child, it sounds like this. Beautiful explanation, convenient reframe. But the silence did real damage. Real receptor rooms were emptied. Real faith was eroded. Real questions about God's care went unanswered for real months. If the craftsman truly loved the person outside the doors, he would have found a way to communicate without compromising the work. A craftsman who lets the recipient suffer to the point of theological crisis for the sake of construction precision is a craftsman whose priorities are questionable regardless of what emerges from the workshop. That doubt just evaluated the craftsman's love by the metric of the recipient's comfort, and love and comfort are not measured on the same scale. My beloved child, a craftsman who prioritizes the recipient's comfort over the quality of the piece is a craftsman who loves the feeling over the future. A piece built with regular reassurance breaks at the joints that were insufficiently pressed because the craftsman paused the pressing to walk to the door. A piece built in sealed silence holds at every joint because the pressing was never interrupted by the craftsman's desire to relieve the recipient's discomfort at the expense of the construction's integrity. The process was love choosing your future over your comfort, and future love does not feel like present love while it is operating. The piece in your hands is the proof the doubt cannot process. because the doubt's framework evaluates love by felt presence during the building. But the piece evaluates love by structural integrity after the building. And structural integrity, the kind that holds under weight, that sustains under pressure, that does not fail at the joints when life places its full load on the construction. That integrity is only produced by the sealed silence the doubt is prosecuting. Type future love if the doubt just argued that a loving God would not let you suffer through months of silence. And you now understand that the craftsman chose the integrity of your future over the comfort of your present, because the piece required joints that only uninterrupted pressing could produce. During every month of the sealed workshop, I was not on the other side of the building, ignoring the sound of your pain. I was directly behind the doors, pressing joints with tears on my hands, because the craftsman who sealed the workshop to protect the work is the same Father who felt every impact the silence produced on the other side. My beloved child, you imagined a detached craftsman, focused, clinical, operating with the professional distance of someone whose attention was fully absorbed by the work, and whose emotional connection to the recipient was suspended for the duration of the construction. A craftsman who could seal the doors and work in peace while the person outside processed the silence as abandonment. I was never at peace during the sealed season. The work was focused. The Father was grieving. My child, the craftsman and the Father are not separate identities that take turns. They are the same hands, and the same hands that were pressing micron-level joints with the precision the piece demanded were simultaneously absorbing the specific grief of a father who was listening to his child's pain through the doors he sealed and could not open without compromising what his love for that same child was building. The grief and the pressing happened simultaneously, in the same hands, in the same silence. There were moments during the construction where the grief nearly won. Moments where the father's instinct to throw open the doors and gather the child who was hurting on the other side almost overrode the craftsman's knowledge that opening the doors at that stage would introduce the acoustic disturbance that would compromise the joint currently under the hands. The father wanted to open the doors. The craftsman knew the cost, and the decision to keep pressing was the most painful act of love the sealed workshop has ever contained. I chose your future, and the choosing broke me in the present. The tears on the craftsman's hands are part of the piece now, sealed into the joints, making them stronger than any tear-free construction could produce. I know the exact prayer that nearly broke me into opening the workshop doors before the piece was finished, my dear one. And I know it because that prayer reached the workbench and landed on the surface of the piece I was building, and left a mark the craftsman's hands incorporated into the final design. Not every prayer during the silence carried the same weight. Most arrived at the sealed doors and were absorbed by the acoustic isolation without reaching the interior. But there was one, the one spoken on the night your faith reached its lowest point. The prayer that was not spoken upward, but spoken outward, not aimed at heaven, but released into the room with the exhausted, floor-level, almost inaudible cadence of someone who was no longer asking for a response, but simply saying what was true. My beloved child, that prayer penetrated the seal, not because the seal weakened, because the frequency of a prayer, spoken from the absolute bottom of faith, carries a wavelength so low it passes through materials that higher frequency prayers bounce off of. The prayer reached the workbench. It landed on the surface of the piece I was building, and it left a mark. The mark is visible on the finished piece, a small impression in the surface that the craftsman did not sand away, because the impression carries the fingerprint of the specific prayer that reached the workshop when no other prayer could. I know every word of that prayer. The words were few. The words were honest. and the honesty is what gave the prayer the frequency that penetrated the sealed doors. The God who heard that prayer from inside the workshop is the same God standing in front of you now, holding a piece that carries its mark in the surface. Proof that the prayer was not lost in the silence but absorbed into the construction, becoming part of the piece itself, rather than bouncing off the doors, the way your pain told you every prayer was doing. Type "It reached me" if God just described the specific prayer you spoke from the lowest point of your faith, the one your pain told you dissolved into nothing, and the prayer penetrated the sealed workshop and left a mark on the surface of the piece that the craftsman incorporated into the final design as proof it was never lost. Now that the piece has been delivered and the receptor room has been refurnished, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction that completes the transition from the silence season to the sound season. Receive the piece without punishing the craftsman for the silence. Your first instinct when the workshop doors open and the piece is revealed is going to be divided. One half of your response will be awe, the undeniable, evidence-based recognition that what is in front of you was worth the silence. The other half will be grief, the accumulated, months-long receptor-emptying grief of a person who endured the absence of felt presence for a duration that produced real damage to real faith. The awe and the grief will compete. Let the awe win. My child, punishing the craftsman for the silence takes many forms. It can look like receiving the piece while withholding full trust. It can look like accepting the work while maintaining the distance the silence installed between your heart and the one who sealed the doors. It can look like acknowledging the quality while privately reserving the right to hold the months of emptiness as a grievance that the piece does not fully offset. Each of those responses is natural, and each one prevents the piece from being installed at the depth the receptor room requires for full functionality. The piece must be fully received, not partially, not with conditions, not with the emotional reservation of a person who accepts the gift but has not forgiven the giving process. When the grief surfaces alongside the awe, and it will surface because months of silence produce a grief that does not dissolve on the first day of sound, acknowledge it, hold it, but do not let it govern the receiving. The grief belongs to the silence season. The receiving belongs to the sound season, and allowing the grief of a completed season to govern the receiving of a new one costs you the full functionality of what the craftsman sacrificed the silence to build. You made it to the open doors, my beloved child, and I need you to stand at the threshold of the workshop long enough to feel what it means to hear the craftsman's voice for the first time after a silence that almost convinced you the workshop was empty. Feel the sound, not the silence, not the echo of the months when the receptor room was empty and the prayers dissolved into acoustic dead space. The sound, the specific craftsman-produced, workshop door opening, piece resonating, receptor refurnishing sound of a God who is speaking again. Not because he started speaking again, but because the doors that were sealed for the construction are finally open, and the voice that was always active inside the workshop is reaching the ears that were blocked by the acoustic isolation the piece required. The voice was never gone. The doors were sealed, and the difference just became the most important distinction of your entire spiritual life. I want to thank you for something the silence made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for staying outside the workshop. Thank you for not walking away from the sealed doors and concluding that a silent craftsman is an absent one. Thank you for the nights you pressed your face against the doors, trying to hear something, anything, and heard nothing and stayed anyway. Not because the staying was easy, because something in you, smaller than the pain, quieter than the doubt, Almost inaudible beneath the prosecution, the silence was running against your faith. Something in you whispered, "He is in there." And the whisper was enough. My dear child, the whisper was me, reaching you through the one micro gap in the sealed doors that the acoustic isolation could not fully close. The gap was the size of a whisper, and the whisper kept you at the doors long enough for this moment to arrive. Let the tears come, not silence tears, sound tears. The tears of a person hearing the craftsman's voice for the first time and realizing that the voice they are hearing is not new but ancient. The same voice that was working inside the sealed workshop every day the doors were closed, now arriving unobstructed into ears that forgot what being spoken to sounds like. Type sound tears if tears are forming right now, because the workshop doors are open and the craftsman's voice is reaching your ears for the first time. And the sound is not new, but the same voice that was working inside the sealed workshop every day of the silence, now arriving without obstruction into the receptor room it just refurnished. You are not the person standing outside sealed doors anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one who pressed their face against the workshop doors, hearing nothing, the one whose receptor room was emptied piece by piece until the room that once carried the resonance of a reciprocal God felt abandoned and hollow, the one who compared their silence to the sound others were receiving and concluded the variable was their own unworthiness, the one who nearly built a theology of abandonment from the raw materials of a construction silence they were never told was temporary. That identity was permanently retired the moment the doors opened and the piece was placed in hands that had been empty long enough to know exactly what they were receiving. You are the person holding the piece now. And holding changes everything the silence said about you. The silence that governed your prayer life, your self-perception, your faith trajectory, and your relationship with the craftsman whose voice you stopped hearing has been permanently reclassified, not as absence, as construction. Every day of sealed quiet was a day the craftsman's hands were producing what your hands are now holding. Every prayer that seemed to dissolve into emptiness was received inside the workshop and absorbed into the piece. Every night of acoustic isolation was a night where micron-level joints were being pressed with tear-stained hands by a father who chose your future over his own comfort and yours. My dear child, the silence was love in its most costly form, and the piece is the proof. From this moment forward you carry the identity of someone whose craftsman builds in sealed workshops, not a person whose God goes silent, a person whose God goes deep. The silence was never the story. The piece was always the story. And the story is now in your hands, resonating at a frequency your refurnished receptor room will never stop receiving. The workshop doors are open. The piece is delivered. The craftsman is standing in the doorway, not sealed away anymore, but visible, present, voice restored to the ears that endured the longest silence to receive the loudest result. And the God who was quiet because he was building something loud is no longer quiet, because the building is finished, and the sound of what was built is filling every room the silence emptied. I was never absent, my beloved child. I was never inactive. I was never silent in the way the sealed doors made it sound. I was working, with my hands full, with tears on my fingers, with a focus so complete that the doors had to remain sealed to protect the precision of what my love was constructing for the one person whose faith endured the silence long enough to receive what only the silence could produce. The doors are open. The piece is yours. And the craftsman who just stepped out of the workshop is never going back inside without you. Subscribe to this channel so that every time the craftsman opens the workshop doors, the sound reaches you before the silence has time to convince you the workshop is empty. You are not someone who lives in divine silence anymore. You are someone whose silence just broke into the loudest sound your life has ever received. The next message carries the first resonance report from the refurnished receptor room, and what is being detected at the new frequency will prove that the silence was always building and the building was always loud. Type workshop open if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the silence was construction, not abandonment. The craftsman was working, not absent. The doors were sealed for precision, not punishment. The tears on his hands are in the joints of the piece yours are now holding. And the God who was quiet, because he was building something loud for you, just broke the silence with the sound of workshop, doors opening onto the most significant delivery your life has ever received.